A Native American tribe in what is now the U.S. state of Oregon is known as the Cayuse. As a member of the Confederated tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla tribes share a reservation and government in northeastern Oregon. The reserve is situated at the foot of the Blue Mountains, close to Pendleton, Oregon. In their own language, the Cayuse referred to themselves as the Lixiu. They resided next to Nez Perce land and were closely associated with them. They were originally from what is now northeastern Oregon and southeast Washington. The Cayuse were expert riders who valued fighting, just like other Northwest Plateau indigenous peoples. The Cayuse pony was created by them. In 1855, the Cayuse migrated to the Umatilla Reservation, where they have established a Confederated tribe, after giving up the majority of their ancestral lands to the United States through a treaty. In their own language, the Cayuse referred to themselves as Lixiu, Haruo Aoki, 1998. Early French-Canadian trappers in the region gave them the name Cayuse, which is derived from the French word caillou, which means stones or rocks. The tribe's name could have been an ambiguous translation of their own name, or it might have alluded to the rocky region they called home. The tribe has a close relationship with the Walla Walla in the nearby Nez Perce. Separate from the nearby Sahaptin-speaking peoples, the Cayuse language is unique. In the 17th century, there were around 500 people living on Cayuse. As semi-nomadic people, the Cayuse had summer and winter settlements on the Walla Walla, Snake, Tucannon, and Touche rivers in Washington, as well as along the Umatilla, Grand Ronde, Burnt, Powder, and John Day rivers in Oregon, as well as from the Blue Mountains to the Deschutes River. 76 traditional Cayuse village sites have been discovered by historian Vern Ray. The majority are transitory, seasonal locations, including 7 Cayuse bands dispersed throughout eastern Oregon and Washington, and 5 distinct villages in the Walla Walla Valley. The Paxapoo was the name of the Walla Walla River Cayuse Band. Only 3 other regional bands are mentioned in other sources, 2 of which are concentrated on the Umatilla River and the 3rd on the Walla Walla River. The Cayuse were renowned as riders and for their courage. They created what is now known as the Cayuse horse by breeding their ponies for endurance and speed. They traveled as far east as the Great Plains and as far south as California to hunt, trade, battle, and capture slaves, since they were no longer limited by what they could carry or what their dogs could pull. In the meantime, their herds grew quickly as a result of both sporadic raids on neighboring tribes and expert breeding. A Cayuse with only 15 to 20 horses was regarded as impoverished by the early 1800s. Affluent families acquired 2,000 or more. Cayuses were able to subjugate their sedentary neighbors on the Columbia because horses increased the range and efficiency of war groups. They demanded payment from the weaker bands in the region in the shape of salmon and other items because they claimed possession of the Dalles, the Columbia's major fishing and trading hub. Known as the Snake People, they were often at odds with the Pute, Shoshone, and Bannock tribes to the south and east, as well as other tribes like the Blackfeet for hunting grounds and territory. Following the inauguration of the Oregon Trail in 1842, the Cayuse suffered as European people flooded into their land. They also faced competition from passing settlers for water and game. Following the discovery of gold in eastern Oregon in 1862 and the California gold rush that started in 1848, American people began to settle in the area. When the area was first settled by European people, the tribe became well known. Around 7 miles from the modern-day city of Walla Walla and a quarter-mile east of the location of the Cayuse Pasha winter town, Marcus Whitman and his wife, Narcissa, founded a mission among the Cayuse at Wailapu, place of the ryegrass, in 1838. There were many deaths among the tribe in 1847 due to a measles outbreak that some believed was brought on by white immigrants. Given that a far greater proportion of the native population was dying from measles than the white population, Cayuse leadership thought the missionaries were purposefully harming their people. Tensions had also increased as a result of settlers' invasion and cultural differences. Whitman and his wife Narcissa, along with 11 other people, were killed when the Cayuse attacked the missionaries. They kidnapped and kept hostage 54 European American women and children. The mission buildings were demolished. The Cayuse War sprang out as a result of the United States armed reaction to this attack. See Cayuse 5, the 5 Cayuse warriors that were hung. The adults created clothes for the tribe, and the Cayuse forced the prisoners to labor alongside their members. After the Hudson's Bay Company arranged for the return of the 49 remaining inmates in exchange for 62 blankets, 63 cotton shirts, 12 Hudson Bay guns, 600 loads of ammunition, 7 pounds of tobacco, and 12 flints, they freed the hostages. Militias chased down and slaughtered the Cayuse and several members of other neighboring tribes, including the Walla Walla tribe. The conflict was ultimately lost by the Cayuse. They shared a reservation with the Walla Walla and Umatilla and were compelled to give up their territory to the United States. The Cayuse had protected the nearby Nez Perce and had long intermarried with them by 1851. Many of them had picked up their language. Cayuse Nez Perce language instructor Kathleen Gordon, a member of the Confederate tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, spoke and taught Nez Perce and had some knowledge of the now extinct original Cayuse language. The Umatilla Indian Reservation was established in 1855 when the Cayuse joined the Umatilla and Walla Walla in the Treaty of Walla Walla. They have formally lived inside the boundaries of the reserve ever since. In an attempt to provide greater access to modern occupations, some members relocated to cities in the middle of the 20th century under the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. In 1904, their official number was 404, which might not be accurate. One pure-blooded Cayuse was discovered on the reserve during a 1902 count. It's possible that descendants who share some lineage with the other tribes nevertheless identify as Cayuse. By that time, the Cayuse language is said to have vanished. The 3 tribes no longer maintain distinct population counts because their members have intermarried. The Whitman Mission was established among the Cayuse Native Americans in Wailatpu, 6 miles west of modern-day Walla Walla, Washington, in 1836 by 2 missionaries, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. Along with proselytizing, the missionaries also brought agricultural irrigation and built schools and grist mills. The Whitmans did not have any Cayuse baptized into their church, despite early achievements. The American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions was about to shut the mission in 1842 due to its failure and excessive expenses. But Marcus Whitman came back east and begged to keep it running. He returned the next year, joining the roughly 1,000 settlers who were making their way to Oregon country. Tension between indigenous and settlers increased as a result of the abrupt arrival of American settlers, largely due to miscommunications and animosity between the two groups. The Cayuse, for example, thought that plowing the earth was a desecration of the earth's essence. As farmers, it goes without saying that the settlers did not agree with this. The settlers mistook the Cayuse for beggars and chased away the men assigned to collect money. The Cayuse anticipated payment from wagon trains that passed through their land and ate the wild food that the tribes relied on. Diseases were introduced by the newcomers. Half of the Cayuse died after a measles outbreak in 1847. In order to make room for incoming immigrants, the Cayuse believed that Marcus Whitman, a shaman and practicing physician, was to blame for their family members' deaths. On November 29, 1847, Cayuse tribesmen assaulted the mission in retaliation. Both Whitmans were among the 13 settlers that were slain. Every structure at Wailatpu was demolished. Currently, the location is a National Historic Site. 53 women and children were detained for weeks before being freed. The Cayuse War was sparked by this incident, which came to be known as the Whitman Massacre. Governor George Abernethy and the Provisional Legislature of Oregon demanded immediate and prompt action, and they approved the mobilization of volunteer companies to fight the Cayuse tribe, if necessary. Henry A. G. Lee was given leadership of a 50-man volunteer battalion that was promptly organized and sent to the Dalles. On December 8, 1847, they were organized as the Oregon Rifles, and on December 10th, they assembled in Fort Vancouver, where they bought supplies from the Hudson's Bay Company, HBC garrison. The volunteer troops individually committed their credit to buy supplies with the understanding that the government would reimburse them later because the HBC would not give credit to the provisional government. The team's mission was to keep any hostile forces from entering the Willamette Valley and defend the Waskapam mission in the Dalles. The governor also established a peace commission, which was made up of Robert Newell, Lee, and Joel Palmer. On December 21st, the Oregon Rifles marched to the Dalles. When they got there, They drove a group of Native Americans away, but not before they took 300 cattle. Although the little structure was also known as Fort Waskapam, the men erected a stockade there and dubbed the station Fort Lee in honor of the commander. Colonel Cornelius Gilliam, who disapproved of the Peace Commission, led a force of more than 500 militiamen in a march against the Cayuse and other indigenous people in Central Oregon in January 1848. After these men reached Fort Lee in February, the militia forces advanced eastward toward the Whitman Mission with a bigger force. Following a combat at Sand Hollows, the soldiers arrived to the mission by March 4th. Colonel Gilliam arrived at the mission and then proceeded to Oregon City to report to the governor, before returning to the Dalles with a small force to support that colony. But on the trip, Gilliam was unintentionally slain in camp, and Lee carried his body to Oregon City. Following his promotion to colonel, Lee resigned as colonel upon returning to the battlefield, but he continued to serve as an officer after discovering that Lieutenant Colonel James Waters had been chosen by the men to command them. The U.S. Army eventually provided support to these militia troops. At first, some Cayuse refused to make peace and invaded remote communities, but others who were seen as favorable to the settlers made an effort to cooperate with the peace committee. Both sympathetic and hostile Native Americans were confronted as a result of the militia soldiers' efforts. Although many Cayuse rebelled, they were forced into hiding in the Blue Mountains after failing to effectively withstand their opponent's weaponry. 5 tribal members, Tilakait, Tomahas, Clackamas, Isayachalcas, and Kimasumkan, were turned over by the tribe in 1850 to stand trial for the Whitman's murder. On June 3, 1850, the 5 Cayuse were hung after being found guilty by a military tribunal. See Cayuse 5. U.S. Marshal Joseph L. Meek carried out the hanging. However, this did not put an end to the struggle. Intermittent killings persisted for an additional 5 years until the Cayuse were ultimately vanquished in 1855. After their loss, the Cayuse territory and population declined dramatically. The Confederated tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation were left with the Umatilla and Walla Walla peoples when they gave up the most of their tribal grounds in 1855. The region suffered severe long-term effects from the conflict. The Cayuse War put further strain on Oregon State's already fragile fledgling administration. It should come as no surprise that the overwhelming debt was handled with little structure or diplomacy after the conclusion of the war, but it was finally paid back through a series of agreements. The government, on the other hand, was not stable. The looming U.S. government was clearly seen during the Cayuse battle, but the temporary government was abolished after the battle. It was replaced by a stronger, longer-lasting government that was better equipped to engage in constructive dialogue with the Native Americans. After pursuing retribution for the Whitman Massacre, the U.S. government attempted to pursue a program of treaty-making with other tribes in the Pacific Northwest. 5 Cayuse men were transported by the soldiers to Oregon Country's capital in March. Even though their guilt and the court's authority were not entirely proven, they were accused, tried, and hung. This trial was the first time the death penalty was applied in the new area after a court precedent. The trial was met with ambivalent reactions for decades.